In a mere 2 minutes on live television, Jessica Carter transformed Stephen Colbert's platform into a nationwide confrontation. She unveiled a racist incident from Congress, remained composed as the audience held its breath, and delivered a single line that halted America in its tracks. This wasn't a staged act. It was a bold dismantling of the establishment. How often must a black woman voice the truth before it truly resonates with others? Stay tuned. This narrative demands every moment of your attention. The invitation arrived not as a formal note, not even a direct call, but as a digital message, infused with allure and veiled in subtle manipulation. We're eager to welcome Congresswoman Carter for an exclusive discussion on leadership, justice, and America's future, the producer penned. The Late Show's stage had hosted giants, presidents, war veterans, and sharp-witted comedians. But this was unique. Jessica had emerged as a national firestorm after dismantling a smug, silver-haired senator with 3 piercing words in a gaze that stopped time during a House session. Countless viewers replayed that moment endlessly, dubbing her the woman who never wavered. Yet, with the acclaim came the backlash, threats flooding her inbox, commentators labeling her confrontational, divisive, dangerous. Now, Stephen Colbert's team sought her presence, poised under glaring spotlights, offering viewers a polished, TV-friendly version of defiance. Her stomach churned. "They don't seek honesty," she whispered to her aide. "They expect a show, and they're wagering I'll falter." The flight to New York stretched longer than usual. Jessica gazed out the window as clouds parted like theater drapes, unveiling a platform she never chose to occupy. Far below lay a city craving drama, where comedy and politics merged into a risky dance of cheers and orchestration. As the plane descended toward LaGuardia, her thoughts drifted back to the incident when a white congressman declared, on the record, "Perhaps your kind should listen more and talk less." She had responded with force. Now she'd need to do so again, but this time amid carefully timed jests and a laugh track. "They aim to neutralize me with charm," she told herself, "but I don't step onto stages to be adored. I arrive to be heard." And this time, the entire nation would be watching. She'd faced battlegrounds before: courtrooms, congressional hearings, hostile media ambushes. Yet, the Late Show's studio felt distinct. It was overly sleek, meticulously arranged, like a set crafted not for candor, but for a takedown masked as hospitality. The corridor to the green room glowed with lights and echoed with laughter, a controlled frenzy timed to the second. Posters of past episodes lined the walls, Colbert chuckling, guests applauding, snapshots frozen in time that proclaimed, "Here, power plays at being lighthearted." Jessica's heels clicked on the polished floor as her aide stepped aside to confer with the production team. Alone now, she overheard it. Muffled voices behind a curtain, hushed and quick. "Let him prod her a bit," a crew member snickered, unaware of her proximity. "Let's see how Congresswoman Spitfire handles live TV." The words struck like a slap. Not Congresswoman Carter, not the woman who stood firm and unyielding, but a stereotype they expected to perform, then unravel. Her jaw tightened. Her grip on the speech in her folder clenched harder. They hadn't invited her to speak. They'd summoned her as bait. She adjusted her microphone, sat upright in the plush chair, and faced the lights, not to bask in them, but to endure them. This wasn't her arena, but it was her moment, and she knew precisely what they anticipated. A fleeting quote, an outburst of rage, just another furious black woman in sharp focus. The applause had ceased. The audience now leaned forward, expectant. Stephen Colbert, poised and polished, offered a familiar grin, a grin audiences trusted, crafted for the screen. But beneath it, she sensed a subtle shift. He began gently, warmly, even praised her as one of Washington's keenest voices, joked about her congressional clash, how she left that senator reeling from his own words. The crowd chuckled, perfectly on cue. She nodded, offered a faint smile, but her eyes held no humor. Then came the heavier questions. "So, Jessica," he said, his tone casual, but his words deliberately chosen. "Some view you as sparking a cultural shift. Others think it's excessive. Are we overly sensitive now, or are we finally waking up?" The audience still grinned, but she didn't. Then he flipped to the next card. "Certain critics," he noted, "say your emphasis on race goes too far, that it fuels division rather than uniting people, particularly when you mention crime in Black communities. Do you fear that might reinforce stereotypes?" That was the moment. No humor now. No cheers. Jessica didn't waver, but she felt the air's weight shift, pressing heavily on her chest. This wasn't genuine inquiry. It was a trap. Not a dialogue, but a stage rigged for tension. They didn't seek answers. They craved a spectacle, a flashpoint, something to share online. The underlying message was clear. Be thankful. Keep it light. Stay within bounds. But Jessica knew something they didn't. She hadn't come to play their scripted part. She came to speak truth, and no camera lens could halt that. The silence lingered like a suspended exhale, not just on stage, but throughout the studio. In that instant, Jessica understood exactly what the room awaited. They expected her to grow defensive, to lash out, to become the headline they'd already drafted in their minds. Congresswoman crumbles on live TV. It was a classic ploy. Push a Black woman just enough to provoke her, then feign shock when she pushes back. Cloak the questions in courteous words, laugh through them, and act like it's mere chatter. But she wasn't deceived. She'd heard this tone before, not only from late-night hosts, but from senators, judges, and reporters who grinned while carving away at her dignity. She remained still, letting the moment linger, because sometimes silence cuts deeper than words. Then she offered a smile, not the warm, safe kind expected of politicians on air. No, this was different. It was subtle, tight-lipped, intentional, the kind of smile worn when you've been underestimated so often it's almost comical, the kind of smile born from being told to hush your entire life, just for daring to speak plainly. "I find it amusing," she said, her voice steady and deliberate, "how frequently powerful white men assume I'll lose my composure, as if, with enough prodding, I'll erupt and hand them the reaction they're fishing for." Her gaze stayed locked on his. She wasn't enraged. She was resolute. "It's as though they believe restraint is some rare feat, as if my ability to sit here, remain calm, and still speak truth makes me a threat." She pressed on. "But here's the thing. I didn't reach this point by shouting. I got here by enduring. I got here by swallowing my words when it stung, by responding to questions that weren't truly questions, by entering spaces where I was unwelcome and staying regardless." Her fingers rested lightly on the chair's arm, motionless. "This strength isn't taught in classrooms. It's forged from seeing your father stopped for no reason. It's born from holding your breath every time your brother walks home after dark. It's learned from knowing you must be twice as composed, twice as articulate, and still, someone will call you excessive." Then she leaned forward, just a touch, not to intimidate, but to assert. "So no," she said. "I won't raise my voice. I won't storm out. I'll stay right here and say what must be said. And if that unsettles anyone, perhaps that reveals more about them than about me." He thought he'd trapped her, believed that brandishing one tweet, a phrase plucked out of context, would accomplish what years of injustice couldn't, that it would shake her, force her to retract. He glanced at his card as if it held a cunning trap, a checkmate moment, then faced the crowd with a practiced smirk. "You once posted," he began, his tone breezy, but his intent unmistakable. American policing is just slavery in a new guise. He arched his brows, as if the word's weight would do his work for him. Then came the jab, laced with sarcasm. "Are you sure you want to hold your congressional seat after a statement like that?" The studio laughed. Not a warm, heartfelt laugh, but the kind prompted by expectation. It wasn't easy. It was reflexive, uneasy, as if the room was grappling with whether this remained a comedy show or had become something else. A few clapped. A man in the third row let out a whistle. But Jessica didn't stir. She didn't blink. She sat there, letting the moment wash over her like a wave that tried, but failed, to drag her down. Then, gradually, the room grew quiet. Not because anyone demanded silence, but because they sensed it. This wasn't a jest. The woman opposite Colbert wasn't following their script. She leaned in, just enough for the camera to capture the change in her demeanor. Her voice, when it emerged, was low, unwavering. "You want to discuss that tweet?" she asked. "Let's discuss it." She wasn't angry. She was focused. That post didn't come from thin air. It stemmed from history, real, recorded, brutal history. Her tone remained even, but each word carried gravity. American policing didn't spring up overnight. It began with slave patrols, white men hired to hunt down enslaved people who dared seek freedom. That's not conjecture, it's fact. And when slavery ended, those systems didn't vanish. They just took new names. Black codes, Jim Crow, stop and frisk, broken windows. Same fear, same control, just in different garb. She paused, letting the truth settle. So when I say policing is rooted in slavery, I'm not aiming to shock. I'm not stirring trouble. I'm stating something uncomfortable because it's true. And if speaking that truth jeopardizes my seat, then maybe we should ask why truth is deemed dangerous. Her eyes held his. You wanted a moment? This is it. Her remarks on policing's origins left the room hushed, not strained, but calm, like the silence that follows when someone voices what others fear to say aloud. She could have paused there, let the quiet linger, let it suffice. But she knew better. Truth alone didn't always cut through, not in a world where data had to shout louder than suffering to be acknowledged. So she shifted in her seat, deliberately, like someone ready to present evidence in a courtroom, not to triumph, but to render denial impossible. "Want to talk facts?" she said, her voice firm, eyes now sweeping the audience. "Let's dive into what the numbers reveal." She didn't raise her tone. She didn't need to. Her voice was cool, precise, but each word landed like a velvet-wrapped mallet. Black Americans account for just over 13% of the population, yet we represent nearly 40% of those incarcerated. That's not an error. That's not misfortune. That's a system operating exactly as it was meant to. She let the point breathe, then continued. A black man with a clean record is more likely to be jailed than a white man with a rap sheet. Consider that. Same crimes, same courts, different results, time and again. And it doesn't end with release. A black person freed from prison is twice as likely to be turned down for jobs, 3 times as likely to be rejected for housing. Is that justice? The audience stayed still. Even Colbert, usually quick with a retort, remained silent. Jessica leaned forward, her gaze steady, not furious, just weary. In schools, black kids are suspended 3 times more often than white kids. Same age, same actions. But one gets a slap on the wrist, the other a record. We're funneled from classrooms to courtrooms before we master fractions. And then we question why whole communities are trapped in fear, trauma, and poverty. She let the words sink in, not theatrically, but thoroughly. This isn't about one rogue officer. It's not about one flawed law. It's about a pattern so persistent, So widespread that the only real question is, why do we pretend this isn't by design? Her tone softened, but her eyes didn't. Because systems don't mistakenly ruin the same people generation after generation. They do so when they're built for it. There were no quips, no music, no applause prompt blinking in the corner, just a room of people realizing they'd come for a comedy show and found themselves facing something inescapable. Truth. The statistics hit hard. No one could dispute that. But Jessica knew numbers' limits. People could challenge them. They could claim the data was skewed, the study faulty, the analysis biased. Numbers could be manipulated, but a personal memory, especially one steeped in pain, couldn't be twisted or dismissed. So she inhaled, let the impact of her prior words settle over the room, then delved into something raw, something vivid. "I was 9, she said softly, "when I first saw a cop lay hands on my father." Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The room leaned closer, not from curiosity, but because her tone signaled this was a rare story. We were leaving church. It was spring. I remember because I wore white tights, and I despised them. They itched down to my ankles. Her gaze drifted past the cameras, not at Colbert, not at the audience, but to a distant memory, a Dallas parking lot, warm air, Sunday stillness. My dad had just opened my car door. He smiled. He always smiled after church, like his soul had been refreshed. But before he could get in, a police cruiser rolled up behind us. No lights, no siren, just 2 white officers who said our car fit a description. She paused, not for drama, but because the memory demanded it. My father asked, "What description?" They didn't reply. They ordered him out of the car, and when he complied, they seized his arm and slammed him against the hood, as if he were a threat, as if he were expendable. Her hands opened slowly, palms up as if releasing an unseen weight. He wore a suit, a church suit, tie slightly askew, hands visible. I recall the clatter of his keys hitting the pavement when they pushed him. I remember one officer glancing at me, a little black girl clutching a Sunday school flyer and saying, "Don't cry. He'll be fine if he behaves." She didn't weep. Not then. Not now. Her voice stayed steady, but the air had shifted. That was when I learned the rules were different for us, that being good, polite, even silent, wouldn't shield us. Not from them. She looked forward again, her eyes meeting Colbert's. "So when I talk about the system, when I sound upset, when I don't sugarcoat the truth, it's not to divide. It's because I recall my father's face against that car hood, and I remember being powerless to stop it. There was no witty comeback, no smooth segue, no music to ease the mood, only quiet, only truth exposed, and a woman who stood firm while holding it up to scrutiny. The silence after Jessica's story was profound. No clapping, no rustling, no chuckles, just the stillness that follows something sacred and painful. The studio lights hummed faintly above, but no one noticed. Even the cameras, gliding softly on their tracks, seemed to pause. Colbert leaned slightly forward, his eyes flicked, not in panic, but seeking a way to shift the tone. What began as an interview had become something entirely different, and he felt it slipping beyond his grasp. He glanced at his cue cards but left them untouched. Instead, he forced a smile, a fragile half-smile, and said what comedians say to reclaim control. "Well," he laughed softly, "if I were a lawyer, I'd be terrified to debate you. You'd wipe the floor with me." It was meant to ease the tension, to win the crowd back, a line he'd likely used before, safe, self-effacing, disarming. But it fell flat, not this time. Jessica didn't smile, didn't offer the escape he sought. Her expression remained unchanged. She looked at him, not with fury, but with a piercing clarity that cuts deeper than anger. A look that said, "You can't joke this away." Her voice emerged, low and firm, almost too calm for its weight. "Stephen," she said, "this isn't a game. This isn't a mock trial or a stage for one-liners." She leaned in slightly, not for effect, but for precision. "We bear the consequences of what you jest about every single day." Her words didn't escalate, but each struck like a judge's gavel. "When this segment wraps, when the cameras stop, you'll head home. You'll chuckle about this with your writers, maybe tease how intense I was. But I don't get to walk away. We can't disconnect from it." She eased back in her chair, slowly, still watching him like a witness, not a guest. "I wake up daily knowing my skin color could turn a routine stop into a tragedy, that my nephew, who's never hurt a soul, could be seen as a danger for wearing a hoodie to a store, that a judge might see my client's brown skin and deem him guilty before he speaks." Colbert struggled to keep his composure, but the change was evident. The smile vanished. His hands, lightly gripping the chair's arms, loosened, as if releasing a tension he hadn't realized. The humor was gone. The studio felt it. The control he held at the interview's start, gone too. Jessica didn't pause there. Her voice remained steady, now nearly hushed. "What happens in venues like this, on platforms like this, isn't just amusement. It's framing. It's a story. You shape how this tale sounds when it hits the internet tomorrow. But for people like me, we carry the burden of how it feels in reality. We bear the scars, the headlines, the funerals." She turned slightly, addressing the room now, not just him. "We're told to stay calm, to wait, to compromise. And when we don't grin through the pain, we're called resentful. When we speak too plainly, we're called hostile. When we sit here and call it what it is, someone like you cracks a joke to make it more digestible." Then her gaze returned to him. "But this doesn't get easier. Not for us." The room's atmosphere grew heavier, the air denser. This wasn't the plan. Colbert was meant to question, she was meant to respond, and everyone was meant to leave entertained. But something else had taken hold, a truth too vast to overlook. He swallowed, visibly adjusted his tie, not to tidy it, but because it suddenly felt constricting. The show was no longer his, not fully, not tonight. He didn't respond, not out of choice, but because, for once, he had nothing to say. Jessica's final words still hung, too heavy to bypass, too sharp to soften with a grin. Colbert's face, typically alive with wit and timing, had stilled, not in fear, but in realization. For the first time in his storied career of steering the room's rhythm, of wielding sarcasm and satire, he was silenced, not by force, but by truth. Pure, unyielding, undeniable truth. The studio ceased to be a stage. It had become a courtroom, a sanctuary, a confessional, something sacred and unfiltered. The audience, crammed together under cool blue lights, made no sound. No one shifted, no one reached for a phone, no one coughed. The silence wasn't uneasy. It was reverent, a silence that declared, "We've just seen something real, and we don't know how to process it." The cameras, gliding on their tracks, began to adjust slowly. One lens widened, capturing the space between Colbert and Jessica. Another zoomed in on her face, as if drawn instinctively to the gravity now centered there. The director, watching from the control room, stayed silent. He didn't call for a cut, didn't cue music. It was as if, even from behind the glass, they knew, "Don't interrupt this. Let it linger." Then, from the front row, a sound pierced the quiet. One pair of hands, slow, deliberate, not clapping for amusement, but in recognition. A few more joined, Then more. The rhythm was tentative at first, like people testing if it was safe to feel what they felt. Then it grew, not loud, but profound, a kind of applause that didn't say, "That was funny," or "That was clever." But that was essential. Jessica remained still. She didn't smile, didn't lower her head, or raise her chin in pride. She sat there, steady and grounded, like someone who'd carried this burden for years, and had, for once, laid it bare before the world. She hadn't shouted, hadn't interrupted, hadn't stormed off, and yet, somehow, she'd flipped the room's power like a switch. Colbert blinked. His hand reached for his cue cards, then paused. There was no escape from this, no quick jest, no ad break to neatly sever the moment. He looked down briefly, as if checking if his feet were still grounded, then looked back at her, not as host to guest, but as a man finally seeing the truth he'd sidestepped with humor too long. He began, but the words faltered. He closed his mouth. The audience continued clapping. Slow, steady, not demanding more, just holding space for what was said. It wasn't about Colbert anymore. It wasn't even about the show. It was about a room of people, many hearing something they'd never let themselves hear before, and choosing, perhaps for the first time, not to flee from it. Even the studio lights seemed softer, less artificial, as if the room itself had tired of pretense. Jessica finally glanced at the audience, just once. No speech, no final line, just a look that said, "You heard it. You felt it. Now, act on it." And still, she didn't move, not until the last clap landed like a judge's gavel. The applause faded, but its weight lingered, thick in the room, like fog no lights could pierce. Colbert sat upright, hands clasped before him, not pushing the dialogue forward, but bracing for what might follow. And Jessica, still calm, still poised, didn't revel in the silence's power. She didn't savor the moment. She wielded it, turned it like a key. Her voice emerged, steady, soft, the kind that didn't need permission, because what came next didn't require it. "There's something I'd like to present," she said quietly. "It's footage from a congressional hearing last month. I know your team marked it as too sensitive for tonight's broadcast, saying it might unsettle viewers. But that's precisely why it needs to be shown." The room's mood shifted instantly, a subtle tightening of the air. Heads tilted, crew members behind cameras exchanged looks. A producer, offstage, stepped forward slightly, hand half raised, unsure whether to intervene. Jessica didn't glance at him. Her eyes stayed on Colbert. "You claim you want real discussion, Stephen. So let's show what real looks like." Colbert hesitated. Just a moment. His fingers tapped the desk once. The control room buzzed in his ear, reminding him this wasn't approved for air. But he didn't dismiss them, didn't refuse. He looked at Jessica, saw the determination in her eyes, and gave a faint nod. "Play it," he said, almost in a whisper. The monitors behind them sprang to life. The footage wasn't theatrical. It was subdued, almost too quiet at first. A congressional chamber, fluorescent lights above, Jessica at a table, flanked by two aides, sifting through notes. Opposite her, a white male congressman, mid-60s, silver hair, a face long accustomed to power, cleared his throat and spoke into his mic. "I don't grasp," he said, voice even and deliberate. "Why folks like you, your kind, seem more focused on tearing this nation down than building it up. Always upset, always offended, always fixated on race. Maybe if you spent less time playing the victim and more time acting American, you'd earn more respect." A pause followed. Jessica didn't react in the clip, didn't gasp or retort. She locked eyes with him and stayed silent, letting his words linger in the chamber like smoke from an unseen blaze. Back in the studio, the air turned icy. The audience froze, Even the creak of a seat or shuffle of feet was absent. Colbert's jaw tightened visibly. Then the clip continued, and it worsened. The congressman smirked, leaned back, and uttered words that hit the air like a bullet. "You know, I sometimes wonder if folks like you would be happier elsewhere. Somewhere less burdensome. Africa, perhaps. Just a thought." No noise filled the hearing room. No objection from the chair. No outcry from the committee. Just the faint rustle of Jessica turning a page in her notes. And her voice, clear, cutting, slicing through the silence. "I was born in Texas, Congressman, and I'm not leaving the home I helped build just because the man in the corner says I don't belong." In the studio, the clip ended. The screen went dark. No one spoke. Jessica sat, still, her hands resting lightly in her lap. She didn't look at the audience. She didn't need to. Her point was made, without flourish, without spectacle, just a mirror held up to a nation often unwilling to face its reflection. Colbert leaned back slightly, fingers interlaced, countless responses racing through his mind, none finding purchase. What could he say? That it was regrettable? That passions flare? That we should all do better? No, not here. Not after that. The audience didn't clap, not yet. They were still processing, absorbing. Something had changed in them too, because what they'd seen wasn't distant. It wasn't abstract. It was on the screen, in the room, undeniable. The screen went black, and the echo of those final words, "I'm not leaving the home I helped build," hung in the air like smoke after a precise explosion. No one stirred. Not the audience, not the crew, not even Colbert. For a moment, the studio seemed suspended in time, as if the space itself needed to pause and breathe. No graphics, no music, no clever transitions, just the raw, unfiltered silence that follows when truth strips away every layer of performance. And at the heart of that storm, Stephen Colbert sat, facing Jessica Carter, not as a host to a guest, but as a man facing a reckoning he hadn't anticipated. He looked at her, truly looked. No cue cards, no earpiece prompts, no camera directions, just her. The woman who'd torn down the show's invisible barriers with only her composure, her fire, and her refusal to be tamed for prime-time ease. Then, slowly, almost hesitantly, he turned to camera one. The red light blinked steadily, waiting. His shoulders lifted with a deep breath, and then, in a voice stripped of sarcasm, he spoke. "I entered tonight's show with a plan," he said, quieter than usual. A flow, a structure. He glanced down briefly, as if seeing a monologue outline now irrelevant. But somewhere along the way, I realized I wasn't leading a discussion. I was trying to confine one. He paused, not for effect, but because he had no choice. And tonight, Congresswoman Carter showed me something I think every man in my position must remember. Sometimes, the greatest power a man has is to stay silent and listen. The words hit like a subtle quake. The audience erupted, not with laughter or applause to fill a void, but with something akin to release, the kind of response when people realize they've been holding tension too long. Some clapped, others stood. A few wiped tears. But the feeling was unified. Gratitude, not spectacle. Respect, not clamor. Jessica didn't stir. She didn't need to. The room had shifted around her. Colbert didn't try to reclaim the stage. He didn't pivot to humor, didn't seek an easy exit. Instead, he let the applause wash over him like a wave, knowing he wasn't meant to steer it. His hands remained folded, his eyes on the camera, and his face, often a shield of comedic timing and detachment, was open. This stage was made for laughs, he continued, softer now. But sometimes it transforms. Sometimes it becomes a mirror. And tonight, I saw things in that mirror I can't unsee. Things I had to confront. He exhaled slowly, then nodded. not to anyone specific, but like a man releasing something. The audience clapped again, not louder, but deeper. The sound swept through the studio in a way applause seldom does, less a reaction, more a collective sigh. As the applause faded into memory and the stage lights dimmed to a soft glow, the weight of what had transpired lingered like a storm's aftermath. Colbert didn't bid farewell as usual. No cheeky wink, no jab at the news, no shift to commercial chatter. He simply thanked her, sincerely, quietly, and the credits rolled in silence. The audience left slowly, subdued, like departing a vigil, not a taping. Jessica rose, not victorious, not boastful, just steady. The storm hadn't passed. She'd carried it with grace through its entirety. Backstage, the mood was odd. No banter, no fist bumps, none of the usual post-show energy. Producers stood by monitors, arms crossed, watching the footage replay. Stagehands exchanged glances, unsure whether to speak or nod. Jessica moved through them like a shadow, bearing something sacred. Her heels clicked on the floor, the only sound in a hallway that had just witnessed history. A lighting tech, mid-30s, in a flannel shirt, headphones around his neck, approached her. He didn't request a selfie, didn't offer hollow praise. He leaned in and whispered, barely audible over the hum of cooling lights. "You didn't just own that exchange. You taught us something no classroom could." Jessica paused, for the first time that night. A faint warmth softened her face, not quite a smile, something quieter. Acknowledgement. She touched his arm lightly, a silent thank you, and continued walking. No entourage, no cameras trailing, just a woman and the resonance of truth she refused to diminish. But beyond those walls, the world was already stirring. Clips from the show flooded social media before she reached the elevator. A 2-minute segment, her courtroom line, her father's car hood, Colbert's silence, exploded on X in minutes. Someone added captions, another stitched it with their tearful reaction. Then came the hashtags. Number Let Her Speak, number Truth Unfiltered, number Jessica Unfiltered. Within 20 minutes, they trended worldwide, not just in political circles, not just in activist spaces, everywhere. People didn't just watch, they paused, rewound, shared. From dorms to newsroom chats, from Chicago barbershops to Boston subways, people stared at their screens, with the stillness reserved for major news or tragedy. But this time, the moment didn't spark fear. It sparked fire. Jessica Carter, calm, brilliant, unyielding, had stood on a stage meant to confine her and burned through the fourth wall. Major outlets scrambled. By morning, The Atlantic, The Washington Post, and Variety ran similar headlines. Not a guest, a watershed moment. Editors dubbed it a cultural shift. Columnists called it a media reckoning. But the public didn't need editorials to understand what they'd witnessed. They knew it wasn't just her words. It was what she prevented the system from doing, reducing her, repackaging her, smoothing her edges for consumption. And through it all, Jessica stayed silent. No tweets, no follow-up posts, no media tour, because she didn't need them. She'd achieved what few could, taken a stage designed to shape her and reshaped it into something else, something beyond their script. She turned satire into testimony, a late-night slot into a national awakening, without shouting, without walking out, without pandering to the lens, just truth. Steady, uncompromising, in a chair they never expected to lose. She didn't need to shout. She was the voice. The first counterattack came 12 hours later, not from an obscure blog or random tweet, but from the New York Sentinel's front page, a centrist paper known for cautious balance. The headline read, "Congresswoman's TV outburst ignites ethics controversy." Below, a subheading hinted at the true agenda: Carter, lauded for fervor, faulted for theatrics. Theatrics, the term used when a woman of color refused to grin through degradation. It was what they called truth when it didn't suit the frame. It was how the system began to reclaim control, one polished phrase at a time. The Late Show segment had racked up 48 million views across platforms in a single day. Clips of Jessica Carter confronting Stephen Colbert, setting the record straight, and airing unedited congressional footage had swept through every algorithm in the nation. Millions rallied behind her, but the system she'd exposed was already pulling strings in secret. By midday, pundits were synchronized. Across morning shows and panel discussions, they voiced concern. We endorse her message, but was this the right venue? Her tone, though sincere, verged on aggressive. Is this the new standard for congressional conduct? Some cited patriotism, others misused MLK quotes, naturally, accusing her of division. None showed the full clip. The Republican House caucus issued a brief statement the next morning, labeling her emotionally erratic and ethically reckless. An anonymous source from her own party leaked to Politico that senior members felt uneasy with how she'd publicly challenged a media ally. The attacks came from all angles. Inside the Capitol, the response was precise. 3 House Democrats, white, male, self-styled moderates, called for a review of Jessica's behavior during the Colbert interview, claiming it breached the ethos of institutional decorum. The same men who overlooked the racist remark in the hearing clip were now deeply concerned about public discourse's tone. One even proposed she resign from the ethics subcommittee temporarily. Jessica remained silent. She arrived at work each morning quietly, past cameras with her head high and eyes forward. She held no press conferences, offered no spin. She didn't refute, didn't justify. She let the system reveal itself, and it did. That silence, though, wasn't surrender. It was strategy. While institutions scrambled, the nation moved differently. Her campaign funds tripled in 36 hours. Black-owned bookstores ran out of The Fire Next Time and Sister Outsider overnight, as customers asked, "Do you have what Congresswoman Carter studied in college?" Teachers contacted her office, seeking permission to use her Colbert clip in civics classes. In Atlanta, a radio station aired her "I don't get to leave this behind" line every morning at 7 a.m. before the news, making it their anthem. An envelope arrived without a sender's address. Inside was a worn American flag patch, faded by sun, with a handwritten note. "I wore this in Fallujah, but I didn't fight for silence. I fought for this. Thank you for speaking it. Signed, Staff Sergeant M. Reynolds, retired." Then came a service medal in a navy blue case with velvet lining. No note, just a name engraved in brass. Lieutenant Darius Kellum, 1963 to Sears. The plaque read, "For valor in a place that didn't value him." Her aide researched the name. Kellum, a Vietnam medic, was shot twice, survived. After the war, 3 Alabama hospitals rejected him because he was black. He died in 2019. His granddaughter sent the medal. The family never received an apology, but Jessica, they felt, was justice still striving. A week later, she entered a private ethics committee meeting, where the chair, an older Midwestern man who once mocked wokeness as a disease, avoided her gaze. He cleared his throat, spoke into the mic. "We'll start by examining the rules for proper public conduct." Jessica didn't speak. She didn't raise her tone. She slid the ethics rulebook across the table, tapped the misconduct definition, and stared at him with a silence that demanded confession. The room stilled. The mic stopped clicking. No one spoke for 10 seconds. Then she leaned back and folded her hands. "Anything further?" she asked quietly. No one answered. Outside, though, something louder was unfolding. "Let her speak" hit 142 million mentions on X. Truth, Unfiltered became a TikTok phenomenon, young creators weaving her words with their own tales of being silenced, diminished, corrected. Carter Taught Me trended for 17 hours. Minneapolis middle schoolers painted a mural of her outside their school. Its centerpiece read, "Not leaving the home I helped build." In a viral video, a young black girl stood before her mirror, brushing her hair before school. She faced the camera, eyes bright with conviction, and said, "I'm not a problem. I'm a mirror. If you don't like what you see, fix yourself." That video, Jessica watched alone in her office just before dawn. She didn't weep, but she lingered, staring at the screen, because in that girl's voice, she heard her own echo, a voice that once whispered, "Don't speak too loudly, don't say too much," a voice that endured hearings, headlines, handshakes with deceitful suits, a voice the system tried to mute, but now rang louder than ever, not because she shouted, but because she never retreated, not once, not even when they tried to drown her with insincere applause and rules they ignored. She'd taken their spotlight and turned it into a beacon, and now it was searing through every room that once tried to contain her. The ripple didn't begin with a politician. It didn't stem from a viral tweet or a late-night headline. It started in the back row of a fourth-grade classroom in a modest school near Cleveland, where a boy named Jordan sat, head bowed, fingers fidgeting with a worn notebook's edge. The school was unremarkable. Brick walls, flickering lights, a playground missing 2 swings. In room 4B, Mrs. Nash, 45, weary but hopeful, stood by a whiteboard, stating the day's goal. Explore the power of speech in democracy. She played the clip in second period, Jessica Carter's face steady on the screen, calm and forceful as she corrected Colbert with quiet strength. The volume was low, but the room's silence amplified every word. No one giggled. No one passed notes. Even the front-row boy who always talked about his dog stayed silent. When the screen darkened, Mrs. Nash paused. Just a moment. Let it sink in. Then asked softly, "What did she mean by, 'I don't get to leave this behind'?" A few hands rose. "She means racism's always on her mind," one girl said. "It follows her home," another added. Mrs. Nash nodded. Then, from the back, a voice spoke, not loud, not trembling, just cautious. "Can I say something?" Heads turned. It was Jordan, the quiet one, always early, always courteous, never volunteering unless prompted. The boy who ate lunch alone, sketching with a pencil so worn it lacked an eraser. He stood slowly, eyes on the floor, then looked up. "That happened to my uncle," he said. His voice wasn't dramatic, wasn't shaky, just plain, and that made it hit harder. He was pulled over. We were in the car, headed to McDonald's. He did nothing, just reached for his wallet. But the cops... Jordan paused, swallowed. His hands gripped the chair in front of him. "They made him get out, pushed him down in the lot. I was in the back seat, crying, but he told me to stay still." No one spoke. Mrs. Nash stepped closer, but Jordan shook his head, just once, subtly. He wasn't finished. "I thought it was just us," he said, his voice breaking. Not with volume, but memory. "I thought it happened because of our neighborhood. I thought we were just unlucky." He looked down, then up, tears in his eyes, unfallen. But when she said that on TV, I knew it wasn't just us. That shattered the room. A second-row girl lowered her head and sobbed, quietly. Another student stood, walked over, offered Jordan a tissue silently. Mrs. Nash sat on her desk's edge, hand over her mouth. She'd planned a writing task. She scrapped it. Instead, she asked one question. "How many of you have seen something like that?" 12 hands rose. 12 of 24. That afternoon, Mrs. Nash emailed Jessica Carter's office. She expected no reply, but wrote anyway. Subject: From a classroom touched by you today. One of my shyest students shared a story I doubt he'd have told without hearing your voice. Whatever they say about your approach or platform, they can't quantify this. They can't measure what it means for a child to know they're seen. You gave him that. The email stayed private, not shared, not posted, but it reached Jessica's desk. She read it that night, alone, lights low in her apartment, TV off. The words on her screen weren't grand, weren't poetic, but they were real, reminding her of a truth no committee could erase. Change doesn't always start at a podium. Some begins in a worn chair at a room's back, when a child realizes they can speak. The next day, Jordan arrived with a new pencil, fresh, bright yellow, with a perfect eraser. During silent reading, he wrote, "I want to be a lawyer to speak like her, not just speak. I want to shield people. I want to stop the pushing. I want people to hear without fear." That week, he ate lunch with 2 boys, one the same kid who once mocked his sketches. They didn't discuss the parking lot. They didn't need to. They just talked, and in the quiet between words, something began to mend. Not a victim. She was a flame, not dimmed by darkness, but the spark igniting change, even in the deepest shadows. The morning after the explosive interview, the city awoke to a new dawn, not just another day, but the birth of a movement. Jessica Carter had reshaped herself from a steadfast Congresswoman into an emblem of unyielding strength. She knew the system tried to cast her as a mere casualty, a figure to pity or edit into primetime snippets, but she rejected that narrative. Instead, she embraced her inner fire, emitting energy too fierce to contain. That morning, as the city's rhythm quickened with new headlines and viral posts, Jessica set out for a quiet walk through the neighborhood she'd always called home. The streets buzzed with hushed talks about her stage performance, how she shattered years of silence, how her steady tone masked a powerful resolve, and how each word burned away layers of apathy. In her simple car, driving past familiar murals and faded storefronts, she reflected on moments when the system tried to crush her spirit. She recalled endless meetings, urging her to be cautious and soften her words. She remembered veiled threats posed as concerns and dismissive looks signaling she didn't belong in power's halls. But now, each memory was not a weight, but fuel, a reminder that every scar and slight had forged her into more than a victim. They'd ignited a blaze no critic could extinguish. As her car navigated the city's veins, Jessica stopped at a small park, a refuge for those seeking peace amid urban clamor. Among twisted trees and peeling graffiti on brick, she felt a silent bond with those forever ignored by society's polished veneer. She stepped out. The crisp morning air enveloped her like a vow. A group of young activists, clustered by a community board, looked up as she neared. Their eyes gleamed with hope, anticipation, and quiet resolve. They saw in her what they'd been told they could never be, a fierce will to reclaim dignity, to shatter lies that long confined them to the edges. A young woman stepped forward, her voice gentle yet firm. "Congresswoman Carter, your words last night changed everything for us." Others nodded in agreement, as if every soul there knew true power lay not in silence, but in speaking boldly, despite systems trying to mute them. Jessica's heart swelled, not with pride, but with the raw energy of truth echoing across generations. "I stand here not as a victim," she said softly, "but as a fire that won't be snuffed out. I stand here because every time I speak unfiltered truth, I light a path for someone forced to linger in shadows." Their voices blended with the rustling leaves, spreading her message through the park like a call to arms. As Jessica spoke with them, not in a rehearsed speech, but in sincere, open dialogue, her fire reached outward, She recounted, vividly, moments when injustice loomed large. The wrenching memory of her father treated as an object. The cold glares of those who saw his pain as data, not a living tragedy, and the systemic neglect that stripped her community of its pride too long. For hours, the park became a fleeting hub for change beneath the open sky. Young and old shared stories, tales of loss, resilience, and above all, hope. Each story strengthened Jessica's conviction that she wasn't alone, that the sparks from her bold stand had spread far beyond that TV studio's walls. The activists pledged to mobilize, to protest, to wield art and social media against a system rooted in inequity. They vowed to honor her courage by carrying the flame forward, never letting it fade. As the afternoon sun rose higher, casting long shadows on the pavement, Jessica was drawn to a nearby community center. Inside, a town hall was underway, a spontaneous gathering of residents furious over recent police brutality. The air crackled, charged with grief, anger, and determination. Jessica took the microphone with calm resolve, hiding the passion within. "I wasn't born to stand by," she proclaimed, her voice echoing, "but to be the spark that ignites a revolution of compassion and justice. I stand here, not defeated by the system, but as one who's learned the only way to change it is to burn it from within." Faces in the crowd, hardened by relentless injustice, softened. Their eyes reflected a spark of new hope. Many stood to clap, not for show, but for the raw, searing truth laid bare. For some, it was long overdue validation that their pain wasn't personal failure, but the result of a society that systematically devalued their lives. For others, it was pure release, a spark lighting a way out of despair. Outside the center, the conversation spilled into the streets. Neighbors gathered on stoops, outside shops, their talks infused with revolutionary zeal. Social media hummed with news and hashtags like "Not a victim, but a fire," and "Carter ignites," trending steadily. Videos of her fervent town hall speech were shared, retweeted, and etched into art. Murals sprang up overnight on once-forgotten walls. One vivid mural depicted Jessica's silhouette, her hair flowing like flames, with the words, "I am the fire that reshapes the world," blazing below. That evening, in her modest home, Jessica sat at a small desk by a window, writing in a worn journal. Her pen moved slowly, each word a record of the day's struggles and victories. No grand monologue here, no rhetoric for a TV crowd, just the quiet reflection of a woman who'd witnessed her community's pain, and, in doing so, fanned resistance's embers into roaring flames. She wrote of the young man who spoke in the park, the elder recalling past marches, the hope in a girl's eyes who now dared to dream. Each word was a vow, a promise to fight for those who could no longer fight, to use her platform, not for fame, but for real change. The words flowed, not as drama, but as raw, unfiltered truth. As night deepened, Jessica set her pen down, gazed at the dark, still city, and felt a clear resolve. She wasn't defined by the pain inflicted on her or her community. She was defined by her strength, her resilience, and the fire within, a fire that would guide those bold enough to follow. In that quiet moment, alone with her thoughts amid the city's distant hum, Jessica recalled the whispered words backstage that pivotal night. "You taught us something. No lesson could." She understood then, with clarity born of sorrow and joy, that the fight was far from over. A system steeped in injustice still needed challenging, and the flame she'd become wasn't meant to flicker. It was meant to blaze fiercely, to burn away the old and forge a new order, where truth wasn't suppressed, voices weren't silenced, and every person, no matter how small, could rise and spark change. The next morning, As the city woke to news of protests, community gatherings, and a surge of support crossing political lines, Jessica Carter became more than a face on a screen or a headline. She was the embodiment of possibility, a living testament that one person's power, fueled by truth and backed by collective courage, could set the world ablaze. That morning, at a busy intersection crowded with commuters scanning news, an elderly man paused, staring at a billboard of Jessica's face. He saw in her eyes the resolve he'd summoned in his own struggles, and whispered, "This is the fire we needed." Across town, a young mother shared the sentiment with her child, pointing to a viral clip on her phone where Jessica's words rang like 100 small fires merging into one inferno. In every corner of the nation, from bustling city streets to quiet rural towns, whispers grew to roars as people embraced a message once reduced to snippets and dismissed by those in power. Jessica Carter was more than a politician or a TV guest. She was the spark that launched a movement, the flame leaping from heart to heart, until a nation burned with a hunger for justice, equality, and the courage to face an unjust system. As she pressed on with her quiet fight, every choice, every word, every gesture, a testament to her resolve to stand against oppression's tide, she knew one truth. The fire she'd ignited would never die. It would grow, fed by the voices of those who refused to stay silent against injustice. This was no fleeting moment of release, but a turning point, a blazing beacon for all told to stay low, to be small, to be quiet. Jessica Carter had become a flame, a relentless, unquenchable flame no system could douse. And that flame vowed to light the darkest corners of society until every shadow of injustice was burned away. Thank you for staying with us to this moment, and for joining this quest for justice. Your support is everything. Like, subscribe, and enable notifications to catch what's next. We'd love your thoughts. Comment below and share what stirred you most in this story. Together, our voices change the world.